Discover a world of books with CapeTalk.
Live from the Franschhoek Literary Festival.
Join the conversation.
If you are just tuning in for the first time, welcome to a show coming to you live from gorgeous Franschhoek. She is showing off today, looking all sunny and blue sky. I think the weather may be turning over the course of the weekend, but we'll enjoy it while we've got it. If you are in Franschhoek attending the Literary Festival, please swing by the NG Kerk and come and say hello to us. Our outside broadcast unit is set up just in front of the church. You can't miss the CapeTalk banners, and come and say hello and tell us what you've been listening to and watching this morning. It's time for book club, and I can't think of a better place to do book club than in the middle of a literary festival. And our second featured book of the day is another memoir. And like Grant's story you heard just now, it is a story of overcoming obstacles through tenacity and through absolute commitment to a dream. This time, though, the obstacles were not physical ones like Grant faced, but rather political and financial ones. With me in our outside broadcast studio is Robert Gentle, who is the author of The Scholarship Kids. It's just been published by Melinda Ferguson Books, so you should be able to find it in stores now. And Robert's enjoyed a successful 30-year career as a financial journalist and working in corporate communications. But this book is the story of the career he thought he wanted to have originally, and it's of how he and his twin brother Michael nurtured a long, ardently held dream of working with aeroplanes one day. Easier said than done, because as boys classified as coloured by the apartheid government, it might have seemed like an absolutely impossible dream. But it would seem, reading this book, that you should never tell either one of the Gentle twins that something can't be done. Robert, I really enjoyed your book. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to our outside broadcast.
Hello, thank you.
Born in Cape Town in 1957, and you write in this book about having what you describe as a normal middle-class upbringing in a coloured suburb. How aware or unaware were you as a child of the political shifts happening around you, and how that normal childhood actually wasn't normal at all?
Probably not a lot, because when you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of age, your life's pretty simple. Is there roast chicken for supper? Am I getting train set for my birthday? Does the pretty girl in class like me? You don't really know the big picture, but our parents did and adults did. So The short answer was yes, it was idyllic, because we were kind of sheltered by age, really.
Yeah. Of course, what it meant for your family, though, and for your parents was, despite the fact that they were both professionals with obvious intellect, with a hunger for news, with keeping up with current events, a hunger for reading, their opportunities to progress would have been limited just by virtue of their skin colour, and therefore by default yours as well. So they made the decision to relocate to Zambia. Robert, for the sake of those who haven't read the book and don't know the answer, won't you explain why Zambia, why then? What was going on?
There was a huge exodus of skilled coloured families to places like, mainly Canada and Australia. This was when apartheid was starting to really get bad. Group Areas Act, tightening segregation. And like many other families, my parents took a hard look at it and said, is this the place we want our children to grow up in? And the answer was, pretty much hell no. So they looked for opportunities elsewhere, and as Zambia beckoned, there were great teaching positions there. The country was short of manpower, so off we went to Zambia.
And before we talk about what happened in Zambia, we have to talk about one seminal moment that happened in your life before you left. And Robert, your parents took you and Michael to the airport to go and see the brand new Boeing jet, which had just come in from London. And let me just read a short quote from the book. He writes the following: "The sight of that plane triggered something in both Michael and me, a love of aircraft that would give our lives purpose and direction. It would even decide what we would eventually study at university. As soon as I got home, I hauled out my sketch pad and pencil. I loved sketching. Here was finally something I could draw over and over, that big, shiny Boeing 707 intercontinental jet. A dream was born that day. Time would give it wings." This wasn't just a passing dream. Robert, this was a deep, abiding love at first sight. Had you had exposure to aeroplanes at all before then?
No,
was
not
it just
at all.
that plane that flicked a switch?
There was a South African Air Force base somewhere near Wynberg. I think it was in Youngsfield. So every so often we would see Harvards from the South African Air Force flying overhead. And it was thrilling to see them. And I still remember the fact that only white people were allowed to fly them didn't detract from the sheer thrill of seeing them overhead. It was wonderful. So, that had been pretty much our exposure to aircraft. But the Boeing jet, that was just in a whole big league. Yeah.
So the seed was planted of the big dream. Now, your family relocates to Zambia in the 60s. Their prospects improve. Your lifestyle improves. They are treated with respect in their jobs, and most of all, for the first time, you get to experience living in an open society where you can go where you please, sit where you please, eat where you please, befriend who you like. I mean, it must have been life-changing for your parents to be able to come and go like that. What did it mean for you and your brother?
It was great fun. Absolute fun. I mean, the weird thing is, I often remark that it's ironic that we had to travel all the way to Zambia before we were able to befriend our first white South African boy and black South Africans. I mean, we previously hadn't mixed with white and black South Africans in Wynberg. But it was exciting because we were exposed to all these nationalities from all over. I mean, our classmates were from India, England, Sweden, America, you name it. It was like this veritable United Nations. I mean, it was exciting beyond belief, and it exposed us to a wide world out there and just made us realize that, well, anything was possible.
The other big thing that happened to you in Zambia is that your second language at school changed, Robert, and no more Afrikaans. Now you need to learn French. And at first, it did not go well for either you or your brother, despite the fact that you were both really clever and really dedicated students. You really struggled with it at first, didn't you?
That's putting it mildly. You know, the tenses, the grammar, the vocab, we just couldn't wrap our heads around it. It was completely alien. It was a fourth dimension. And we actually failed French in our first year, and we were kicked out of French class. But my dad knew the headmaster, pulled some strings and got us back in, quite shameless. And it's only thereafter that we kind of knuckled down, because now we had no choice.
Yeah.
So we studied hard, but this time, instead of listening to the teacher, because that wasn't working, we bought textbooks. My brother and I each bought a Teach Yourself French textbook. Yeah. And we would just go through them page by page, chapter after chapter, and by golly, it worked. We soon got the hang of it, and then we just raced ahead. There was no looking back.
You know, you're selling yourself short, because you weren't just reading through the books, you were immersing yourself in every aspect of French culture you could get your hands on as well. And I say this as somebody who picked up French in high school. Okay. Learning it from a book and being able to speak it properly are two very different things. When I go to France today, I sort of stutter through my phrases and everyone changes to English pretty quickly. You had the opposite. You learned from listening to radio, from listening to French music, from immersing yourself in the actual spoken language as spoken by people in France, with the result that you learned to speak it like a native Frenchman. Yeah. But it was more than just the language. I mean, you found a real love for it and a real love for French culture through that process, didn't you?
Absolutely. And we got to know our first real French friend in Zambia. He was dating a family friend of ours. And he introduced us to French culture. He gave us all his records. He taught us about food and how to eat, and that the cheese comes before the dessert, and you've got to have red wine, and if there's steak, it's got to be medium or medium rare, but not well done, etc. We basically fell in love with the culture, and mainly through listening to radio night after night after night. We just ended up being impregnated with the French culture. It's wonderful.
Radio is good for something after all.
Absolutely.
Just for those who come in late to this bit of radio, my guest with us at our outside broadcast unit is Robert Gentle, the author of a new memoir called The Scholarship Kids. It is a really, really lovely telling of his life story alongside his identical twin brother Michael, and of how they fell in love with aeroplanes as young children and nurtured this dream that one day, against all odds, they would be involved in the aviation industry somehow. So take us back to the very first flight. When did you actually get into the air for the first time, Robert?
For the very first time was in Zambia. We had a family friend, was actually a fellow teacher, someone who worked with my dad. He was a weekend pilot, and he took us up in a little Cessna 150 light plane. That was okay, but we really wanted the real thing, like a big, massive commercial airliner, and that only happened fairly late. I think we were at varsity, maybe 20, 21 years old, and we got into a VC-10 jetliner for the first time and flew from Lusaka to Johannesburg. It was a thrilling flight. We actually asked to be taken onto the flight deck, and the stewardess was a bit surprised. You know, normally it's little 6-year-old little boys, and you've got these two grown-ups who want to go and chat to the captain. But they let us in, and we had a nice chat, and I think the cabin crew were impressed by the fact that they had visitors who actually knew something about aircraft.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the first time. It was very late in life.
But of course you had by then immersed yourself in everything you could read and learn about aeroplanes and about how flight worked and all of that. However, the challenge of actually getting to work in the industry, I mean, the possibility of training as a pilot was financially completely out of reach for one of you, let alone for two of you to do at the same time. So you and Michael had to make a plan B. Robert, what was it?
The plan B was, well, if we couldn't fly the planes, well, by golly, we're going to work in them or around them, but we needed to be exposed to planes. But all of this was going to cost money. So we had this outrageously ambitious dream to first do this in stages. Let's do a degree in mechanical engineering first. Let's try and get a scholarship for that, because that's easier to do. We were in Zambia, and the University of Zambia School of Engineering offered mechanical engineering. We could get in. And we did. And when that took 5 years, and when that was over, we said, right, now we've got mechanical engineering behind us. Now we've got to realize the dream. We need to study aeronautical engineering. But where? And who's going to pay for it? And that's how we ended up going to the French consulate in Cape Town and basically asking if they would sponsor us, and they did.
I mean, the chutzpah of it, you've got to love these two boys walking into the consulate saying, here we are, please will you pay for us to go and study in France? But the fact that you could ask that question in beautifully spoken, properly pronounced French was the game changer for you, wasn't it? I think if you'd walked in and said it in English, Robert, you might have been shown the door.
Yeah, they were flabbergasted, to put it mildly, because my brother and I walked in there and we went to reception. We said, hello, bonjour, and God, two locals speaking French. This isn't in the script. And we chatted, and they just couldn't believe it. And they said, hang on, we're going to speak to the scholarship officer. You'll want to see him. So this lady goes inside, knocks on the door, and this chap comes out. And, 5 minutes later, we're sitting in his office having an interview. He tests our French. We pass the exam. He gave us a little test. And, I mean, I don't want to trivialize it, but it was almost a formality. Everything took place in French. And when we walked out of there, I still remember he looked at us and he gave us a conspiratorial wink. He says, go back to Zambia and finish your studies and don't worry about a thing. That's when we knew
that
we were
is literally what happened. You knew that the money was there to send you to France. Now, I mean, the description of your flight over to France had me in fits, because it was so funny. These two boys are sitting on the airplane. The food is a little bit strange. You're not quite sure what to do with the little sachet that came alongside the salad. Everything is big and new and wonderful. And Robert, I mean, the excitement of knowing you were actually realizing the dream that you were going to study in France, and that you've been posted, you're told, to Toulouse, the home of Airbus. This is great. And then you got there and you realize you're not studying aeronautical engineering at all. They've put you in a sort of a bridging program for students who arrive in France expecting that you wouldn't cope. I mean, in a way it was wonderful for you because it gave you a sort of a lighter year to ease yourself in. But in a way it must have been incredibly frustrating because you went there with a particular goal and you had to sort of delay it by a year. Talk to us about that first year adjusting.
Yeah, it was frustrating at first because we certainly were capable of starting our aeronautical engineering studies right away. Our French was good enough for it.
Wow.
So off they pop us to Toulouse, and Toulouse, Airbus Aviation, fine. So, we're going to the University of Toulouse, we're going to start our studies tomorrow. And we rock up at the university and suddenly we realize this is a humanities university. And we meet the other students in the class. It's a handful of people from Singapore, Iran, and so, but what's going on here? And it turns out that we had been put into an intense immersion program for postgraduate students. So my brother and I were, in a sense, anomalies. We already spoke very good French. But, the system is the system. And if you're a postgraduate student and French is not your native language, 1-year bridging program. But you know what? We're glad it happened because it was a glorious 1-year holiday of visits and visiting churches and eating out in restaurants and sailing on yachts. It was just wonderful.
Incredible.
So.
And then, of course, finally, you did get to go and study aeronautical engineering. And if I may pause there, I want to look back over your shoulder at what's happening back in South Africa at this point, because you and Michael have left. The future is bright, fully funded studies in France. You're in the dream field you wanted to get into. What on earth was it like for your parents back home? Because by this point, Zambia is not doing well. It's shifting towards a one-party state. There's media repression. They recognize the bright future we thought we had here isn't there any longer. And they made the decision to move back to Cape Town. I mean, I'm sure by now you've had the conversations with them later in life in adulthood about what that was like for them to go back to apartheid South Africa knowing they were going to be treated like second-class citizens. One sort of eye on the stars watching their boys soaring. It must have been so hard for them, Robert.
Yeah, but you know what? You are right. But on the other hand, my parents have always been pragmatic. I mean, that's what made them decide to leave South Africa in the first place. You know, you make the best of where you are. And they went back to South Africa and they just knuckled down and got on with it. You know, they bought a house, they continued teaching, and they just carried on. Yes, of course it was wrenching, because suddenly all these people of different nationalities and races that they used to mix with back up in Zambia. Suddenly, you know, back they were in coloured South Africa and all they met was other colours. But, you know, they just got on with it. I've always admired my parents for that. They were pragmatic and forward-looking, so they never let that hold them back.
Not easy for you, though, to move between those two worlds, Robert. I mean, you know, you're in France, you're studying in the field you love, you're living this wonderful lifestyle, exploring the culture, immersing yourself in the food and the wine and the people. And when you come home to see your parents, you're pigeonholed again. And not just restricted to the areas of South Africa that the coloured boy from Wynberg is allowed to occupy, but even navigating your own friends and family. You now have one foot in a very different world. And what was that like for you?
Yeah, you put it very beautifully when you say we were straddling different cultures and different worlds. We were South African and we were also not South African. We were partly French, we were partly Zambia. We were like this mix of cultures and experiences. So I remember when we went back to South Africa on a holiday from France, people looked at us as if we were weird. You know, we didn't fit the standard stereotype anymore. When we started speaking French, they didn't know what to make of us. Where are these people from? Yeah. So again, my brother and I were, you know, like our parents, we were pragmatic. We were like chameleons. We adapted. We had a good time in South Africa. Yes, there was apartheid, you know, but we knew we were going back to France very shortly. So again, we made the best of it. Yeah. But incidentally, what was interesting was that social apartheid was starting to fray at the edges, because we were able to go into a couple of restaurants with white people, and a French guy we'd met at the airport. He actually took us out to dinner at some fancy hotel in Cape Town. Yep. There were no apartheid signs anymore. Nobody batted an eyelid, you know. We were having a lovely dinner there, and okay, a bit curious stares, but otherwise, I was saying, okay, this is strange. Things seem to be changing.
Things are starting to change.
Yeah, it was the thin end of the wedge. I mean, obviously, it would be many, many years before things normalized, but it was heartening to see that things were starting to change.
I just want to recap again for those who came in late to the conversation that we're in conversation with Robert Gentle, chatting to us about his memoir, The Scholarship Kids. Dayward on our WhatsApp line says, I'm a Wynberg boy, and he wants to know if you're related to Linda Gentle from Mission Road.
Oh my God, that was my aunt.
Oh, no way. It is such a small world.
She lived just a few houses down from us.
Here we go, Dayward. You've got to get the book and read it, please. I mean, the irony is, after all these conversations about the dreams of aeroplanes and aeronautical engineering, having got the scholarship funding, having studied the aeronautical engineering, neither you nor Michael are pilots or aeronautical engineers today. You didn't actually end up staying in that field.
Yeah, it's on the surface it's weird, and yet it isn't, because we had this dream, and I mean it kept us, it sustained us for 10, 15 years, and it got us to where we needed to be. We achieved our dream. We studied aeronautical engineering. We worked in aviation for a year. But in the last stage of our internship at UTA Airlines, we discovered information technology, because they put us in the IT department, and we started working on programming and applications, and we fell in love with that. So, you know, one dream leads to another, and that's what you discover as you go through life. You go through a number of different careers. So that's how it wasn't a waste of time at all. It took us to where we needed to be, and my brother ended up working in computers his entire life, and I branched off into journalism and writing, because I discovered I wanted to tell the story, and the urge was so strong that I didn't realize that it actually harbored a deep desire to become a writer. So here I am.
And after 30 years of writing other people's and other businesses' stories, you finally wrote your own. And I mean, it is just such a lovely read, Robert. It's so full of inspiration. And I know that word's bandied around a lot, but the message I took away from this book was that the dream is allowed to change.
Absolutely.
You can nail your colours to the mast and say, that's what I want. I'm single-minded in my focus of going after it. And it's okay to get there and go, actually, maybe this isn't what I wanted after all, and be brave enough to say, what next? There's a lovely phrase that Robert uses in this book to say that he was born in South Africa, bred in Zambia, and buttered in France. I mean, when you think of home, where is home to you? If somebody asks you where you're from, what do you say?
I'm from South Africa, but my heart is also in France. Yeah. So I have this visceral need to visit France on a regular basis. I read French books and novels, and I listen to French radio, and I watch a lot of French TV. So part of me in any given day is French. So I'm a bit of both.
Do you dream in French or in English now?
Both. It depends
yeah.
on what the dream is about. Occasionally I still dream in French, but most of the time now I dream in English.
Okay.
When I was in France, it was the other way around. After a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, my brother and I started dreaming completely in French, and English just went into long-term memory. We kind of lost our ability to speak proper English.
It's such a wonderful story. We're almost out of time, but I must ask you Keith's question. He wants to know, if you could buy your own plane, what would it be and why?
Oh, my word. Off the top of my head, a Gulfstream G7 executive business jet.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Why? Because some of the world's most successful people fly it, and it costs a bucket full of money that I don't have.
You're going to have to sell a lot of copies of this book to get there. But you know what? You're going to start this weekend, Robert. I know the audience is coming to listen to you at Franschhoek Literary Festival are in for a treat. Thank you so much for joining us in our outside broadcast studio, and thank you for this lovely book. Really enjoyed talking to you today. The book is called The Scholarship Kids. The author is Robert Gentle, and it is available in stores now, published by Melinda Ferguson Books, and you'll find a copy at around about 290 Rand in stores as we speak.